So I come from like the alternative drag scene in Melbourne, which I helped start. There wasn't much room for someone like me in the traditional drag scene that was there, or in many traditional drag scenes. And then, so I performed there for a while, and then performed here for the last 5 years, mostly organising my own events, so giving myself gigs. And I developed a performance practice and also a moderating practice through that, although it's only recently that I have used such words to describe it. So I decided that I wanted to be able to make work in different contexts. So I did a lot of performing literally underground. I decided I'd like to do it. And I've done theatre in Australia and stuff like that, but I wanted to, with more regularity, have access to art spaces, art economies, and audiences who don't demand to be entertained. So I applied for the SOTA program, and since then have been making different sort of inroads into more dancey and less draggy worlds, while keeping my feet, keeping a foot in drag as well. I'm primarily motivated by my desire to be, to make work and in the context, in a broad range of contexts, and to have access to resources that are there. But of course, I would like it very much if people could come from drag like they could from any other discipline. I'd like it if drag was afforded the respect of a discipline, like, you know, like dance or theatre or something like this. I was speaking with Agata, and she spoke to me after an assessment piece that I delivered, saying that where I interviewed I think 12 or 13 trans and non-binary drag performers, to use them and to quote them with equal weight as the theorists that I would use in this performance lecture. And I said that I'd done that because I wanted to see more respect and recognition of drag in dance and in art in general. And Agata raised the point that actually drag is used quite often in contemporary dance. And this is true, that it's very often that you see in dance someone like for example, like a man in wigs, in a wig and heels and stuff like that. That's great. But I think there's a key difference in someone coming from drag as a discipline, rather than using drag, because it's about who has access. And she asked if I thought that there was something appropriative about this or something like, and I don't think that at all. I think that's the wonderful thing about drag, is that anyone can do it, and everyone should do it. Maybe not, but well, like there's the general sort of like social definition of dragging, like doing drag is dressing up as the opposite sex, and this becomes problematized, and this is where I find it more interesting as well in the case of trans and non-binary people. So I don't identify as a man at any point in my life. So and more my clothes don't change very much when I'm doing drag. So then that raises the question, like what is it? And I think I'm very happy with that being the question. So the answer to that question being the question itself. The first, I did my first gig and then straight away started organising a party with a friend of mine, Godzilla. And our first guests at this party were two people dressed as French poodles with hunchbacks on roller skates. And we were like, I guess that's drag, yeah, that's fine. So it's like, drag is whatever anyone calls drag, I guess. And so to drag something, this is something I've noticed, is that these are things that like people use, like typical, like the toolbox of drag is often like, I noticed that a lot of people, well, it's a big thing to avoid doing one-to-one stuff in contemporary art. It's a faux pas to like say too bluntly and to show too clearly what it is that if you have something that you would like to communicate, it's best to sort of obscure this or or complicate this in a way. And I think a nice thing about drag is that you don't necessarily have to worry so much about one-to-one, because actual virtuosic drag is one-to-one. It's where the movement of your lips match the sound of someone singing. Like, I'm not a virtuosic drag performer, but like there's a technique of saying several things at the same time, and not necessarily meaning any one of them more than the others, that I think is very specific to drag and very useful in drag. So maybe, yeah, drag is that which refers to performance related to gender and sexuality. So even if you're dragging like a completely abstract concept or something that is seemingly really divorced from gender, then you're still referring to a technique that has been pioneered by people who work with that. But yes, I think it's definitely expandable, and I think it's very fashionable to do that as well. Drag has become big in the last maybe 5 years. I found it really funny because like I was doing drag for 4 years in Australia, and then I moved to Berlin, and then after a year everyone got into that year's season. Like that was the one that really blew up, that year's season of RuPaul's Drag Race. And then all my friends are posting all this stuff about drag, and I was like, I was doing drag for 4 years in front of you and you never got this excited about it. But like, you know, people really got into the television show. And then this is where drag has been become like, yeah, it's become really sort of like fashionable. It's always been sexy, I guess. Well, not always. It's been, yeah, like violently repressed, and still is. But like, yeah, this does very much, and I'm conscious of this as well. And also, it's very much like trans stuff is really sexy at the moment as well. And you know, non-binary, problematizing gender is very current. But yeah, it's also difficult to not get too, well, I feel like I'm very sort of focused. Like I believe very much in the work that I'm making, and if there are some like conditions that I would sort of look sideways at that make it possible for me to make my work, I guess I can't spend too long looking sideways, because I'm looking at my work and I'm very very committed to it. And so I think but yeah, and as you say, I think it's also a thing that you have to be careful about, like how do you promote marginalized or othered voices, and at what point does this become tokenization or fetishization? But I think it is a very powerful thing to put a body on a stage and allow it to speak for itself. It's even more powerful if you do it outside of a program that it's like, you know, and now there's like a program of trans people, and then you never get to like, so I'm not aware of this happening, but like such a situation would be, then it's a bit more see-through. If it's just the inclusion of a body, and then it
inclusion for the sake of inclusion.
Inclusion for the sake of inclusion, then it can create a situation where certain identities or whatever are cool or have a currency, and ultimately this creates a situation where like a certain like marginalized identity becomes like has a currency, but it's very rare that like the subject of this situation is benefits from that in a meaningful way. So like to be considered cool for a couple of years and then left to the side, or to have people then sort of like claiming knowledge about like something that they'd actually have very little real engagement with, or something like that, is that can be a problem. And then also yeah, as you've spoken about, like certain, yeah, it's very much a problem when coolness comes into it, I think. Because no one really benefits from that, and like the social capital that you get from that doesn't pay your rent. One of the like central ideas behind my practice is that is not true. That it's possible to cut off something that's critical from something that's entertaining. But but I think there are sort of like pretty clear sort of demarcations. I did an exercise with you where I brought invitations to contemporary dance performances from Facebook and invitations to more traditional drag events, and we compared these and said, like, you know, like, how is it that people can communicate what they're doing via Facebook in these two like disciplines or areas, drag has much more, like, it sells itself as entertainment and something that's fun and liberating, and contemporary dance sort of sells itself as more like critical and somber, and also like as something to be evaluated in like a very sort of like deep way, whereas drag offers itself to be enjoyed. And I think that there's a lot of power in refusing to accept that dichotomy. So if you want to like present something that's critical, if you want to present something that's critical in a drag context, it's totally possible to do it. You just have to make it entertaining as well. And one of the things that's really powerful about entertainment is that people like entertainment, and so you can reach a really broad range of people, and that they don't have to like, you're not dealing with class anxieties and all of this sort of stuff that comes with more sort of like art that's held in like a higher regard. And with entertainment, you get behind people's guard as well. So people can think that they're just sitting there enjoying something, but then you can speak to them in a way that's like that might not be possible in other ways. And also, it's difficult to get like a dance audience to laugh compared to a drag audience, but it is possible, and they do like it when it happens. I really like the idea that my work could be enjoyable and also serious. I guess in terms of like the strategy of how to construct a career, I haven't thought about how to how to queer that or how to drag that. That's not something that's really sort of crossed my mind beyond the fact, or beyond questions of how I would do that as someone who wants to do that continuing through drag. I like the remove between the self and the performing self that comes with drag. But I don't know if I were to think about like this process of like a career trajectory in a critical way, then I'd be more likely to think of structural change rather than how I would do that differently. Because I think given that I'm just one person or two, like I have a limited capacity to change things, or I have a capacity to change things as I experience them, but I'm also very interested in collective action. So I would be more interested in like collectives or like unionization or something of the industry in which I'm working. That would be my conception of like queering, how to work like that. But I think the thing that like where I would be thinking of queering or dragging something would be in my relationship with an audience, or in my relationship, my cooperation with other artists, rather than necessarily the more career sort of like formal stuff. I want to make work, and I want to do it in more comfortable ways, and I want to collaborate with artists that I think are really interesting. Yeah, I was thinking, I had this sort of crisis earlier this year because I had seen a whole bunch of people talking about how, basically, and had spoken to a whole bunch of people in the freelance scene talking about how, even if you succeed, you're still going from grant to grant to grant to like, you know, like breadcrumb to breadcrumb to breadcrumb. And I'm thinking like, what sort of satisfaction could this bring me in life? Like to be, like if I reach, you know, the top or whatever of what it is that I want, like I'll never have the life stability and security that I would have if I went back to this job that I had at a trade union in Australia. So I was like, what is it that sort of sustains me in that situation? And then it's like the work that I make and and my collaborations with other people. I realized that something like Queens Against Borders, which I do, is that I get, like if I'm looking back at my life, that's the thing that has made me very satisfied and has made me very happy. So I guess my desire would be to continue to be engaged in the things that I'm doing, and for that to be enough to satisfy the fact that financially I'm a little pressed. Well, it's very simple. I bring people from the HZT. I bring dancers and artists from like a broad variety of fields, and I program them in drag events. And then I also bring, like when we did Get Fucked at the HZT, bring people from the alternative drag scene and help to place them inside a black box at HZT. So yeah, in very sort of concrete terms, through...
So it would be like a promiscuity for the sake of mixing up.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's really beneficial for me, especially because I get to see all of it if I'm present at all of it. But it's really beneficial because one thing that I notice with if you're going to do a 5-minute dance piece, it tends to be a lot more simple and concentrated than like a 5-minute drag piece where people are, you know, like tearing off wigs and like throwing cardboard paper props around and all this sort of stuff. Often they're cutting pop songs together and stuff. There's a huge amount of work that goes into and a huge amount of resources that goes into like making like the body that is on the drag stage, but then you see like other performers like who have a dance background or buto background or visual art background will like do something that's more like I don't know, yeah. They approach drag in a very different way, and I don't tell them that they have to do drag, but if they're performing at a drag event, they're already thinking about gender. So this goes back to like where like things can be things that don't look like drag can be drag, but they will always be referring back to more traditional drag or something like that. So yeah, it crosses the bridge in that way.
And after doing this, is there any particular reaction or consequence or something that you didn't expect that, or do you see anything beneficial after having done this? Any change or any?
Absolutely, people get very excited about it on both sides. I think, in particular, people were very excited to see Oozing Gloop perform at the HZT, who is obviously brilliant and has a very specific performance style. And is so unrestrained, so that was very thrilling for people. But then people who who wouldn't necessarily go and see art or theatre and dance, but do go and see drag very often, are very excited to see something that is very weird and that is very like concentrated or skilled in a way that they're not used to. So I've been surprised at how much everyone's so into it. Absolutely. So I think, but this is more on a personal sort of level, because I don't think that you can say something like like art should be critical or is best when it's critical, but I would say art interests me more when it's critical because I was already interested in politics for a long time before I became interested in art. That's so my practice is informed by this interest and by this experience, and as far as what I'm interested in, I'm very much interested in, like, yeah, like it is like, I don't think it's enough to continually make performances with a liberal or emancipatory idea that are inaccessible to like a broader public, because like after a while, if that becomes a norm, then it becomes a bit well, then you can question the motives. So like, what are the motives, and what are the strategies behind this body of work? So I think it's, for me, I'm very much interested in accessibility as well, I guess, and taking things outside of where they would naturally be at home. It's nice to provide a reprieve. It's nice to have a space where work that is like, that isn't just like, you know, completely flat and like easy to consume. Like, of course, it's no one, like no one's calling that into question. Well, people are calling that into question, but like I would definitely not support calling that into question. But I'm particularly interested in work that, if it's critical, then how does that work relate to things outside of its own assumed context?